I want to tell you something I have never said in a room with other people, not because I was afraid to say it. I have never been afraid of words, but because there was never anyone in the room who would have understood it. And I have a deep, almost physical, aversion to being misunderstood. Here it is. Control was never something I wanted. Wanting implies a choice, a moment where you look at two options and select one. I never had that moment. Control was not an option. I selected from a menu. It was the condition under which I could function at all. The way a lung functions in air and does not function without it. You can call that a pathology if it makes you feel better. Most people need to pathologize what they cannot imagine inhabiting. I call it clarity. I call it the simple recognition that the world is a system of forces, money, information, loyalty, fear, desire, dependency, and that these forces are always in motion, always flowing in some direction. And the only question that has ever interested me is whether I am the one determining that direction or whether I am simply being carried by it. I chose very early not to be carried. I was 11 years old the first time I understood what control actually was. Not power, not authority, not dominance. Those are the crude approximations that people use when they haven't yet seen the real thing. What I understood at 11, sitting in the back of a car, watching my father negotiate with a man who had something we needed, I understood that the man doing the asking was already lost. The moment you ask, you have revealed the shape of your need. And the shape of your need is a map that anyone with eyes can read. My father was a brilliant man, educated, articulate, principled in the way that people are principled when principle has never cost them anything. He sat across from that man and he asked, clearly and directly, the way he believed honest men conducted business. The other man smiled. And I watched my father's position in the room collapse, like a building whose foundation had just been quietly removed. Not dramatically, just gone in a single moment, because he had asked. I decided, sitting in that car, that I would never ask, not because asking is weakness. That is the adolescent reading of what I witnessed. The adult reading is more precise. Asking reveals the gap between what you have and what you need. And that gap is the space through which other people's control enters your life. I closed that gap, methodically, over decades. I closed it by ensuring, in every situation I entered, that I had already provided what others needed before they knew they needed it. That I held, quietly and without announcement, some piece of what the room required, that my departure from any given arrangement would cost more than my presence. This is not manipulation. Manipulation is the tool of people who are already behind, who are trying to compensate for a deficit of real position. What I am describing is structural, architectural. You build the room before you invite anyone into it, and then the room itself does the work. Let me tell you what control feels like from the inside, because everyone talks about power as if it is something you observe from the outside, a visible quality, like height or wealth. They say, that person is powerful. They say it the way they would say, that building is tall, as if it is a fixed property of the object itself. From the inside, it is nothing like that. From the inside, control is a constant, low-frequency hum. It is the sensation of knowing, in any given situation, what the variables are, who needs what, who owes what, who is afraid of what would happen if you moved this piece, or withheld that information, or introduced this person to that person at precisely this moment, rather than 6 months from now. When that sensation is present, I function. I think clearly. I sleep without difficulty. I can sit in a room with 20 people who are all performing their various versions of confidence and calm, and I can feel completely, utterly still. Because I know the room. I built the room. When that sensation is absent, when I am in a situation where the variables are opaque to me, where I do not know what the people around me know, where the terrain has been prepared by someone else's hands, something happens that I can only describe as a physical response, not panic. I have never panicked, but a kind of compression, as if the air in the room has become slightly thinner, as if something essential is being rationed. That is what I mean when I say it was oxygen, not metaphorically, physiologically. The absence of control was the absence of the capacity to breathe at full depth. People misunderstand what I controlled and how. They imagine something cinematic, levers pulled in dark rooms, envelopes passed, explicit commands issued and obeyed. This is the version that makes it into stories because it is legible. It has a grammar that audiences can follow. The reality is quieter and more total. I controlled through information, through the careful accumulation over years of what people needed, kept private. Not because I sought it, I want to be precise about this, but because people, when they sense they are in the presence of someone who will not judge them, who exists outside their normal social world, who is sophisticated enough to understand complexity without being threatened by it, people confess. They reveal. They hand you, voluntarily and often eagerly, the exact knowledge that makes them manageable. I never asked. I never needed to ask. I simply created the conditions under which people wanted to tell me things. And they did. For years. Across every industry, every government, every tier of influence I moved through. I controlled through access. Through being the singular point of connection between people and things they could not reach any other way. A conversation that needed to happen between two men who could not be seen in the same room. A door in a particular ministry that opened to almost no one. A relationship with a person whose public position made direct contact politically impossible, but whose private relationship with me made the conversation simply a phone call. When you are the bridge that cannot be replaced, you do not need to control the traffic. The traffic controls itself around you. And I controlled through patience. This is the one that most people cannot replicate, because most people are in too much of a hurry. They want the return now. They want the favor repaid this quarter. They operate on the time scale of their own anxiety, which is always short. I operated on a different time scale entirely. I could hold a debt for a decade, could maintain a relationship for 15 years with no explicit agenda, simply tending it. A dinner here, a letter there, a piece of information passed at the right moment. Knowing that at some point, the geometry of events would create a moment where that relationship was precisely what was required. And when that moment came, I was already there, already indispensable, already inside the decision, before the decision was formally made. That is control, not the moment of action. The 10 years of positioning that made the action unnecessary. I want to tell you about the network, not a conspiracy. I reject that word absolutely. Not because it is untrue, but because it implies something intentional and dramatic that misses the actual nature of what I am describing. Conspiracies are planned. What I built was organic. It grew the way cities grow, not because anyone decided where every street would go, but because people made individually rational decisions that collectively produced a structure. The structure, in my case, was a web of obligations, access points, shared interests, and mutual vulnerability that spanned decades and crossed every boundary, national, ideological, professional, that people outside it would have assumed were impermeable. I was the connective tissue, not the center. I was never interested in being the center. Centers are visible. Centers attract scrutiny. Centers are, by definition, what falls when the structure is attacked. I was the tissue between the organs, the material that held the whole thing together without being, in any formal sense, a part of any of it. When you are the connective tissue, you are everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. You are in every room without being on any org chart. You have influence over every decision without being accountable for any of them. You move through the structure with a freedom that no official position, no matter how elevated, could ever provide, because official positions come with official constraints. I had no official constraints. And unofficial constraints, the ones that come from relationships, from mutual interest, from the web of what people know about each other, I had helped design, which meant I knew exactly where they applied and where they didn't. Here is the thing about control that no one tells you. It is not a tool you pick up when you need it. It is a state of being that you are either in or you are not. You cannot be a person who controls situations some of the time and a civilian the rest of the time. The machinery does not work that way. Once you have built the circuitry, once your mind has been rewired to read rooms, map dependencies, identify leverage points as automatically and involuntarily as other people read facial expressions, it does not turn off. It runs constantly. I have been in rooms where there was nothing at stake, no deal being made, no favor being exchanged, no information of any particular significance flowing in any direction. A dinner party, a charity event, a birthday, and I could not be present in the room the way the other people were present. While they were tasting the wine and making small talk about their children, I was doing what I always do, mapping who defers to whom, who is performing confidence they do not feel, who has had a conversation with whom that they have not mentioned to anyone else in the room, what the subterranean structure of the relationships in this space actually is beneath the social surface that everyone is carefully maintaining. I could not turn it off. I stopped trying a long time ago. This is the price of the thing, not a dramatic price, not loneliness in the cinematic sense, not cold isolation, not the villain's empty palace, something subtler, a permanent, slight remove from the texture of ordinary experience, the inability to simply be in a room, to simply have a conversation without the analytical layer running underneath it, filing, assessing, storing. I gave up a certain kind of presence in exchange for a different kind of sight. I made this exchange consciously, and I do not regret it, but I want to name it, because the people who pursue this and do not name it tend to find it finding them, eventually, in forms they did not anticipate. The question I am most often asked, implicitly, by the way people look at me, is why? Why the need for this level of control? Why not simply accumulate wealth and live with some degree of comfort and freedom, like a normal person of means? Why the architecture? Why the patience? Why the relentless, decades-long construction of a position that could never be officially acknowledged and would never be publicly celebrated? The honest answer requires me to go back to that car, to that 11-year-old, watching his father ask. What I felt in that moment was not ambition. It was not even anger, though there was some anger in it. What I felt was something closer to terror. Not terror at the specific outcome of that specific negotiation. The stakes were not particularly high. Terror at the condition. Terror at what it meant to be a person who needed something from another person and had no structural guarantee that the need would be met. The world, I understood in that moment with a clarity that has never left me, is divided into people for whom things are arranged and people who must arrange them. People who walk into rooms where the conditions have already been set in their favor, and people who walk into rooms where the conditions are set against them and must somehow overcome this through charm or argument or performance. My father was the second kind. A good man, navigating a world that had been arranged by and for other people, working within systems he had not designed, by rules he had not written, toward outcomes he could influence but never determine. I decided at 11 years old that I would be the first kind, that I would be in every room I ever entered for the rest of my life, the person for whom things had been arranged. And the only way to guarantee that, the only structural guarantee, the only arrangement that does not depend on anyone else's goodwill or competence or continued loyalty, is to be the one doing the arranging, to be so embedded in the architecture of how decisions get made that your presence is not a favor anyone grants you. It is simply a fact of the landscape. Control at this level is not something you exercise. It is something you become. And here is what no one tells you about becoming it. There is a moment, not dramatic, not marked by anything external, where the thing you built to protect yourself becomes the thing you cannot live without, where the oxygen you manufactured becomes the only air you can breathe. I have been in situations, rare, but they have occurred, where the control slipped, where events moved in directions I had not prepared for, through people I had not mapped, along channels I had not built, where I was, briefly, in the position of my father in that car. And I want to tell you what that felt like, because it is the most honest thing I can tell you. It did not feel like losing. It did not feel like failure. It felt like drowning. Not the dramatic drowning of someone who has fallen into water, the quiet, internal drowning of someone who has simply run out of what they need to function. Not panic, not despair, just reduction, a narrowing of capacity, a sudden awareness of how much of what I had taken to be myself, my clarity, my calm, my ability to see the room, was not inherent to me, but was a product of the position I maintained. Without the position, there was much less of me than I had believed. This is the thing about making control your oxygen. It works. It works better than anything else I have ever encountered for producing the experience of being fully, completely, dangerously alive in a world that mostly produces people who are merely existing. But it also means that the thing you built to make yourself free has become the cage you cannot leave. I knew this. I had always known it, abstractly, The way you know that fire will burn you while you are warming your hands over it. The knowing did not change anything. The hands stay over the fire. I am not going to tell you not to want this. That would be dishonest, and it would be condescending. What I will tell you is what it actually is, stripped of the mythology. It is a trade, a specific, irreversible, total trade. You give up the capacity for a certain kind of ordinary experience, presence, ease, the ability to simply be in a room without the machinery running, in exchange for a kind of sight and a kind of position that most people never access, and that most people, if they accessed it, would find unbearable within a year. The people who last in this world, the ones who are still, after decades, genuinely indispensable, genuinely inside the decisions that shape things, they are not the ones who chose this trade most deliberately. They are the ones for whom the trade was made so early, so deep, so completely below the level of conscious decision that they never experienced it as a trade at all. They simply woke up one day and realized that control was not something they exercised. It was something they breathed, and like all things you breathe, you do not think about it until the air runs out.